So this unit is going to focus on how do we use the camera in more creative ways other than just having it sitting in one place looking at one thing. So I'm going to approach this unit a little differently. So instead of having a very step-by-step, you do what I do format, instead I want to do a scene, introduce you to some settings on the camera, some constraints, and ways to use those. So you start to form an understanding of ways that this can be done. And then after we kind of work through some simple examples and introduce this to you, your actual project will be to go to your train scene, take some of these and use them to create your own shots of different parts of your train scene. So let's go ahead and set up some objects that we can use to experiment and work through some of these things. You can see that in my scene, I've already added all of those. But if you look here on the right, I have everything listed that I want you to add and any scaling or naming necessary. So we already have the mesh cube, then add a mesh UV sphere. And the location of these doesn't really matter. I just moved it back so that way it's not on top of all the other objects. So add a cone, add a cylinder, add a torus, add a monkey, and then add a curved circle, scale that by 10, and rename that object path. Then add a second curved circle, scale it to 20, and rename that to camera dolly path. And I'll explain what a dolly is here in a little bit. Also add an empty sphere, rename it camera focus object, add an empty cube, rename that camera tracking object. And last, add an empty cone and rename that camera dolly. So pause your video. You can leave this list up if you want, and go ahead and add these things to your scene. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to add all the objects that we have in our scene. So let's go ahead and hit 0 on the number pad so that we're looking at what the camera sees. Make sure it's selected. Let me move this up so you can see my outliner. And if you need to, you can select the camera here in the outliner. Then let's go down to the properties panel and go to the green data tab, which looks like a little movie camera when we have the camera selected. And we're going to look at a few settings and a few things that we can change here. So let's first look at type. And by default, it is set to perspective mode. So perspective mode means that things that are farther away look like they're getting smaller, just like in real life. If I click this drop down, we can go to orthographic. Orthographic means that things do not get smaller as they go away, which is how you will see things in technical drawings sometimes. When you look at the scene from the front view or the top or the right, they're set to orthographic by default. We have panoramic, which I've not used, and I would make some assumptions that we probably have to stretch our camera out and do some other things, but I've never worked with this, so I'm not familiar with the settings, but it is there, and if that's something you want to look into, I'm sure you could find some YouTube videos explaining that. And you have a custom option, which once again, I've not worked with, so I don't know much about that. So let's go back to perspective. And perspective is what you'll probably be using most of the time if you're trying to create a real scene. Next, we have focal length. This is basically your camera's zoom. If I make this number smaller, you zoom out farther away. If I make this number larger, you zoom in and get closer. So if for some reason you didn't want to physically move the camera, you could animate this number to control the focal length to zoom in or out. And the default, if I remember correctly, is 50 after I've changed it. Next, you have Shift X and Y. So once again, if you didn't want to move the camera, you can animate these numbers to tilt the camera left to right, up and down, if necessary. Then we have Clip Start and Clip End. Typically, you're not going to be so close that you're going to have trouble with clipping at the start point, but the end point on your train scene is probably not going to be short enough and I have changed this number. I think it's typically set to 1,000, but something like 10,000 should be enough for your train scene, maybe 100,000, but that should be pretty easy to adjust. Now let's look at depth of field. So we're going to expand this, and we're going to turn depth of field on. Now, you cannot see the depth of field effect when you're in solid view, so we are going to switch to render view. And just to make the scene a little easier to see, we're just going to change the world color by clicking the world tab, make it a lighter gray. And let's just go ahead and give our objects a material so they're the color. So I'm just selecting all the objects, going to the material tab at the bottom, clicking new, and I'm just going to change this to color. And they're all selected, but right now the active object is the only object that got a color. So if I hit Control L, link materials, they'll all have that color. So now that we have this set up, we hit 0 on the number pad. You can now see these a little more clearly. So let's go back and select our camera. We'll go back to depth of field, and we're going to look at 2 ways to control the depth of field. Let's start with the second one, focus distance. So if I change this number, if I make it really small, objects are going to start to become blurry. And basically what this means, the distance from the camera that things are in focus. Most cameras nowadays on your phone have autofocus, so you don't really control this manually. But if you have a DSLR camera, like a professional photographer would use, you can manually adjust the focal length by changing this number. Now, typically in our setting, adjusting the focal distance is a little bit not useful. You can't animate this. There are times that you would want to do this, but typically what's a little more helpful is if you have an object that you tell Blender to focus on. So it's going to autofocus on the object that you want to be in focus. So I'm just going to take the eyedropper and select the cube. Now, it's focusing on the cube, but the focal range, which is down here, which we're going to talk about in a second, the focal range is set to such that things that are around it are also in focus. So it's got a deep fill area that is in focus. So we're going to look at this next area called aperture, and we're just going to look at f-stop. So we make this a really small number like 0.01. Then what happens? Blender is focusing on the cube, but everything else in front of it or behind it becomes blurry. So you'll see this a lot in photography where they'll make the background blurry, or if you have some objects on a table and they want you to focus on one, it's clear and in a frame, but the other things are starting to become blurry. So we change this to maybe 0.2 or 0.3, maybe even 0.04. You're getting what you would expect. You see this object, but these others are just a little bit blurry. So this is a tool that will help you control what's in focus, which in turn will help control what the viewer of your video or still image focus on. Now, there are times that you might have 2 characters and you want the focus to switch between them, or you might want to do something creative. So if we go back to selecting the camera, and right now our focal object is the cube. So if I wanted to focus on something else, I would have to come and click another object and go back and forth. So what people typically do, instead of focusing on the object, you have a focal object, which we did name. We have camera focus object. So we're going to change the focus on object to our camera focus object, which was, I believe, our empty sphere. And mine's in the background, so it's focusing on that. But if I grab that, in this case on the y-axis, and move that forward, as that moves, Blender focuses on it. So this could be animated to move around between different objects so that the camera focuses on the object I want. And I only have to animate this one object. I don't have to constantly switch between objects. And that will give you control over this feature. So those are some of the basic camera settings that we would use. Let's look next at one of the constraints that will help us make sure the camera is facing the object that we want. So let's once again select the camera, and let's go down to the Constraints tab. And we're going to, once again, make sure the camera selected, add a constraint, and we're going to use track 2. So now we can tell a camera which object to look at. So I'm just going to use the eyedropper, and let's select the cone. So you can see that the camera has moved to focus on the cone. If for some reason it's not facing the way you want, there are some options to change the axis that's tracking to, up and down locations, but most of the time it's going to face the way you expect it to. And if you were to have some issues, these will allow you to fix that. If you look at this constraint, we have an influence at the bottom. So 1 means it's 100% facing the object. 0 means it's 100% facing the way it was before, or it's 0% facing the object, I should say. So 0 means you're facing the original orientation of the camera. 1 means the camera is going to turn and face the object that you have selected. And if I select the cone and grab that, the camera is going to follow that anywhere the cone moves to. If, on the other hand, I select the camera and grab the camera, no matter where I move the camera to, the camera is always going to focus on that object. So this allows us to do some really complex animations with the camera, but we can always control what the camera is focusing on. Now, let's say that I have some characters, they're acting or doing something in the scene, and I need to switch the camera between the two. With this setup, I have to manually switch what the camera is focused on, which is a little problematic because you can't animate this switch by clicking on this. So instead, we're going to change our target to the camera tracking object, which should be our empty cube. So now we can grab this, and I'm going to press Shift Z. That way it locks it on the Z axis. So I can have my camera focus on this character, animate this empty cube, and then when it's time to move to the other character, animate this empty cube and move it over to this character. And this allows me to animate one object and move the camera's focal point wherever I need that. Okay, so before we get to point 5, copy location constraint, let's set up a few things and kind of use a little bit of what we've talked about. So let's take our, we'll take the monkey, and we're going to make the monkey go around this first path, the one that we named, where'd it go? Object path. So the monkey is going to go along this path. So just like we've done in our previous lesson with the train, we're going to select the monkey, go to the constraints, and add a follow path constraint. We're going to pick the path. Oh, didn't select there. What did I do? Let's see. Did I accidentally make this? Okay. When I was adding this, I went crazy and made this a mesh instead of a curve. So let me fix that real fast. And let's go back to curve circle, scale 10, and name this object path. Sorry about that. So now if we select the monkey, and we can now select object path, you'll notice the monkey goes somewhere strange because its origin is not in the center. So we can hit Alt if the monkey is selected, hit Alt G. That will clear the origin and put the monkey where it should be. And we're just going to click Animate Path. And let's set our start frame to 1 and end frame to, let's do 1,000. So on frame 1, the monkey is going to be at 0. So hover over this and hit I. Then let's go to frame 1000. The monkey is going to be at 1. Hover over that and hit I. So if we hit play, the monkey is going to go around our path, and we can do follow curve so it faces the way we want. And I can switch the axis to negative so it's facing the direction I need. So our object is moving. Now, let's pretend that we have a car chase and the car is driving and they have a track with a cart, which is called a dolly, where the camera is going along a track beside the cart. Yes, I know we're going in a circle. We're typically using straight lines for that scenario, but the camera's going around too to follow the cart. So let's go ahead and use our camera dolly. So we're going to parent the camera to this. So let's hit Alt G to bring that to the center. And I'm just going to scale this up so it's a little easier to see. Doesn't really matter which way it's rotated. Let's select our camera and hit Alt G so that the camera is there in the center. I'm just going to grab that on the Z axis, move it up so it's floating above that. And then I want to parent the camera to the cone. So select the camera first, Shift select the cone second, hit Control P, and parent to object. Our camera is now connected to our empty cone. Let's go ahead, just to make this a little easier, we're going to temporarily turn off the constraint. And let's just set our camera's rotation. So I hit the letter N to open the property shelf. Let's do X at 90, Y at 0, Z at 0. And that way it's facing straight to the front. Now, we could just put the camera with the path and not have this other object, but this will give us some flexibility if we wanted to do some rotation or something and not necessarily have to rotate the camera. We could rotate or make changes to this object. But if you're doing something simple, you can maybe skip this step, but I'll kind of leave that up to you. So now we're going to take our camera dolly. We are going to add the follow path constraint. This time we're going to use the camera dolly path. So it's there on the dolly or on the path. Let's do follow curve. Let's hit animate path. And that will automatically animate that for us. So we don't have to go and adjust that. And it seems like they are going at the same pace, so we don't need to change anything. So here we have our object that we want to get a video of. Our camera is on a path following that around. And we just want the camera to focus on the monkey. So if we just select the camera, and now we're going to change, well, I forgot we set this up. We're going to go ahead and put this back to the camera tracking object. So it's going to look at our object, and we want this to be where the monkey is. Now, if I parent it, but then later I want to move it somewhere else, I have to unparent it. So you can't really animate that. Since the monkey's moving, I can't really animate this exactly the same and then move it to somewhere else. So we're going to use the next constraint, the copy location constraint. So my focal object is the empty cube. The tracking object. And for now, before we even do that, our focal length should be the same place as this. There are times you want that to change, so that's why these are separate. Let's go ahead and just parent this to there for now, since we're not going to really be doing this separate, just to make your life easier. So I'm just going to select the empty cube, the tracking object, Shift S, cursor to selected, select our empty sphere, the camera focus object, Shift S, selection to cursor, they're there together. So now I'm going to select the sphere first, Shift select the cube second, Control P, object. So now their focus and our tracking object are at the same place. So let's go ahead and select the cube, and we're going to add a constraint to our cube. and this constraint is the copy location constraint. And I want to copy the location of the monkey. So if I have this at 0, the cube is at its original location. If I increase it to 1, it moves to where the monkey is. So if we hit 0 on the number pad and then hit play, we can see that our camera is tracking the monkey as it goes around. But let's say as we animate this, we want the camera to focus on the cone for whatever reason. Maybe there's some action going on, so you want to focus away from the car or whatever's going on to a different part of the scene. So with our empty object, we can add a second copy location. This time we're going to copy the location of the cone. So now you can see that Blender is focusing on the cone, and it's updating automatically to always be focusing on that. At this point, if you wanted to have a really complex scene and wanted to have a lot of control, you could start to use drivers and add empty properties to the camera and have all the settings to all the controls right here really easy to get to. We're not getting that in depth, so we're just going to slide things here, but realize that you have the power to put all the control in one object, so you're not going back and forth and selecting different things, all by creating drivers. But since I've already talked about that, I'm not going to go into that again, but you should have the skill set to do that. So I have 2 copy location constraints on the empty cube. Blender prioritizes the last one over the others. So whatever value is on this last one is going to override anything before it. So if this is at 1, it's going to focus on the cone. If I decrease this, it's going to switch from the cone to whatever's before it. So before it, we have focus on the monkey. If I turn this off, it's going to focus or move back to where it was originally. So I can move it back to the cone. I can turn the cone off and move it back to the monkey. And you can have as many of these as you need for your scene. So let's go ahead and pause our animation. Okay, I think I will stop there for this video because this covers some of the basics of the camera itself and a couple of constraints that will allow you to have a lot of control of where the camera is focusing and what it's looking at. And in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about some things you can do with actual numbers that have been animated to add some vibration of shaking movement to the camera, and also how you can control the camera as if you were just walking around the scene, holding it and capturing that movement to make it a bit more realistic, as in just someone having a camera and looking around. So we'll stop here for this video and then pick up in the next video.